Thank you, recording lady. Okay. So hi, everybody. It's really wonderful to see everybody. We've got a few more folks joining. So let me just tell you the format. This is what I did last time a few weeks ago, and I think it worked well. I'm going to spend about a half an hour sort of walking through how I have been teaching this material. I've been teaching it for about 10 years, and I didn't have a book. So you're in a better shape than I was. So sort of how I've been teaching this material, and then leave about 25, 30 minutes just for questions and anything I can help with. And I will, if you remind me, I will drop a chat. I'm going to drop a link in the chat for bulk purchases if you do decide you want to teach it, or if any of you want to connect with each other. And minimum bulk order is 25, and it drops the price to $18 a book. So it's about $10 off list. So I'm going to put in the chat. Oops, sorry. Stop that. I'm going to put in the chat a link to a folder in which I'll walk you through the folder in a minute, but I have created a folder of a lot of the text sheets that I have used in the past, because there's really no reason for you to have to make them, because I've already made them. They are Word documents, most of them, so that you can do whatever you want with them. These are mostly some are excerpts from books. They're mostly biblical and rabbinic texts. So again, just so you don't have to go make them yourself. And if there's any mistakes in there, they're my mistakes. So please correct them, but I think they're correct. You don't have editing. I'm not giving anyone editing access to this so that no one messes it up. What you can do is make copies or download them and then edit them there. If for some reason you can't do that, let me know. But that's a link. Hey, Marcia, good to see you. Awesome. So folks who just joined, I asked people to put in the chat just where you're zooming in from, and if you want to teach the book somewhere, you're thinking of teaching the book, where that might be, if you'd like to put that in the chat. So let me begin by sort of saying how I've approached this when I've taught this in the past. I usually begin where the book begins, the first two chapters of the book, which are sort of laying out why the whole issue of metaphor is important, and how much this metaphor that we live in and live by, God is a big person, usually a big male person, but at least a big person, is so embedded in our brains that whether we say we believe or don't believe, that's what we're dealing with. And until we sort of expose that for people and really explore that, I find it's harder to do the work of the rest of the book. So I'm just going to screen share. Just wait one second. I'm going to screen share a sheet that I've put that is in the folder that I just shared. That just brings some text. I reference these texts in the book. But these are a little bit more in depth. So if you want to spend a little more time with folks, these might be helpful. So for the Reconstructionists among us, I begin with Mordecai Kaplan. And Kaplan really put, I think, this in my head, this notion that there's a distinction between what he calls belief in God and conception of God. The word belief is a bad word. He goes on to say the belief in God is the intuitive experience of cosmic power upon which we depend for our existence and self-fulfillment. And so he posits, Kaplan, who was, for folks who don't know him, one of the foremost American Jewish thinkers of the 20th century, Kaplan posited that there was a sort of a universal experience of something out there and in here, that's universal, this experience, but that the conception, the way we conceptualize this changes over time. Now, he had a somewhat progressive notion of this, that our concepts actually got more refined and better. I would disagree with him about that, but it was an interesting distinction between experience and concept that I think leads right into the cognitive linguistics. So just a little Kaplan quote for those of you who might be teaching this in a recon context. The next excerpt, and in the folder in which this is, and I'll show it to you, I have some more things. This is a fabulous book, and I would highly recommend it. It's called Evolving God, A Provocative View on the Origins of Religion, Barbara J. King. She is a prehistoric anthropologist. So she's an anthropologist of like early humans and pre-humans. And she makes a very powerful scientific argument for this notion that, what I bolded here, the desire for emotional connection with the sacred is fundamental to our species. So she's not in the business of does God exist or not exist. She's trying to talk about human experience and that there's something in us wanting to connect to something beyond us. that goes back to prehistory. It's very engaging, really powerful, and she has some great, I think, responses to the sort of scientism folks who try to reduce all of reality to the firing of neurons, to say that there's something more going on here. It's a beautiful book. Again, I reference her in the introductory chapters, but I recommend the book. It's not a long book. And again, there's some more excerpts that I have in this folder. And finally, on this sheet, I've brought a few things that, again, I reference in the book. One is this book, which, again, I would recommend if you want a on one foot sort of introduction to cognitive linguistics. It's this first selection, James Geary, I as an Other, The Secret Life of Metaphor and How It Shapes the Way We See the World. Geary starts with the work of George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, who created cognitive linguistics. I believe they were the original practitioners of this, and brings in a lot of neuroscience to support their claims. So I often start with this. I often start the class with this paragraph, and I ask people as I'm reading it to see how many metaphors are in it. Metaphorical thinking, our instinct not just for describing, but for comprehending one thing in terms of another, shapes our view of the world and is essential to how we communicate, learn, discover, and invent. Metaphor is a way of thought long before it is a way with words. For centuries, metaphor has been seen as a kind of cognitive frill, a pleasant but essentially useless embellishment to normal thought. Now the frill is gone. New research in the social and cognitive sciences make it increasingly plain that metaphorical thinking influences our attitudes, beliefs, and actions in surprising, hidden, and often oddball ways. Metaphor is finally left off the page and landed with a mighty splash right in the middle of our stream of consciousness. So if you go through this, there's an incredible amount of metaphors. Some are very obvious, like stream of consciousness or cognitive frill, but even shapes our view of the world is a metaphor. Way of thought is a metaphor. Basically, Geary says it's impossible to speak. It is impossible to communicate without metaphor. It's not just speech, it actually structures how we see reality. So that brings me to the next little excerpt I brought here. From Lakoff and Johnson. And the points in this piece are really important. And then I'm going to show you how metaphor works. And then I'll open it up. So they begin by, in this piece of, so this is their first book, 1980, Metaphors We Live By. They make this argument, metaphor is one of our most important tools for trying to comprehend partially what cannot be comprehended totally. Our feelings, aesthetic experiences, moral practices, and spiritual awareness. These endeavors of the imagination are not devoid of rationality. Since they use metaphor, they employ an imaginative rationality. So again, this is how our brains work. It's rational, and it's the only way we can access very large parts of our experience, the sacred being one of them. And this next point is really important. Many of our activities, arguing, solving problems, budgeting time, etc., are metaphorical in nature. The metaphorical concepts that characterize these activities structure our present realities. This is my emphasis. New metaphors have the power to create a new reality. This is really important, right? The metaphor we're in when we talk about God will actually structure our experience. This can begin to happen when we start to comprehend our experience in terms of a metaphor, and it becomes a deeper reality when we begin to act in terms of it. They go on to talk about in this paragraph about the introduction of the metaphor time is money, or time is a precious resource. This metaphor did not exist in human experience until the Industrial Revolution, until people started getting paid for their work by the time of their work. And it's still not the experience of people in some parts of the world, in some communities. But once this metaphor entered our reality, it changed the way we experience time, right? When we're waiting in a doctor's office, we feel like we're wasting time. We talk about budgeting time, spending time, wasting time, etc. And we really feel like it. It's really, we get uptight when we feel like we're wasting time, right? It's structuring our reality. It's not the only metaphor for time. No metaphor defines something. It just captures one aspect of experience. Time as a flow is also a metaphor. And when we think about time as a flow, we think about it sort of, going endlessly behind us and endlessly in front of us, completely different than time as a precious resource. Both important metaphors, both completely different metaphors that capture different parts of our experience of time. And the final point they make is the last one I want to make to you, which is this one. Though questions of truth do arise for new metaphors, The more important questions are those of appropriate actions. Again, my emphasis. In most cases, what is at issue is not the truth or falsity of a metaphor, but the perceptions and inferences that follow from it and the actions that are sanctioned by it. So we come out of the realm of arguing about whether or not God exists into a completely different frame, which is, what does it mean to think about God this way? What does it mean to experience the sacred this way? What are the actions that are sanctioned by it? What are the practices that are suggested by it? Are they wholesome or unwholesome, right? So we just leave behind this completely pointless argument from my point of view, whether God exists or not, and just get into a completely different conversation, which to me is much more fruitful, which is, if connection to the sacred, to the divine, to holiness, however you want to talk about it, is a fundamental part of human experience and how we relate to the cosmos. How do we do that? What frames that experience? What shapes it? And what did different metaphors for the divine, what actions and thoughts do they lead to? That is the shift that I'm trying to get to in my book. A couple more things you can read. Again, it's in the thing. Sally McFaig, who's a Christian theologian, speaking a lot about metaphor. If whoever's dog is barking, if you could mute yourself, that would be great. And then finally, a really great piece from our colleague David Stein. But I want to just spend a little time going over this, and then we'll move into the next part. So this is how metaphor works. This is important. This comes from Lakoff and Johnson. The way metaphor works is that there's a target domain and a source domain. The target domain is the realm of human experience, or the realm of the world, that's complex, that's conceptual, and that we need multiple metaphors to get at. So it might be an emotion like anger. It might be a realm of category of experience like ideas. It might be something like time that exists, that we exist in. Target domain is complex, and it can only be experienced and talked about through metaphor primarily. The source domain is where the metaphors come from, and they're always part of our embodied experiences. This is very important. The source domain is always physical and embodied. So for example, anger is a hot liquid in a container is a metaphor that we live by. We say it all the time. So is anger is a horse, which sounds weird, but then Lakoff and Johnson would say, well, look at our language. Anger is a hot liquid in a container. They are boiling mad. She blew her top. I need to blow off some steam. Anger is a horse, unbridled anger. He couldn't rein in his temper. Here are some ways you can harness your anger. And you can see in these two metaphors, they're getting at different aspects of our experience of anger. So the first one is just about that aspect of anger that like makes you feel like you're going to explode, right? It's an uncontrollable force that, you know, we can maybe contain, but probably not at some point. It'll boil over. Anger as a horse is different. It's a strong emotion. It's a powerful force that we can bridle and rein and ride, right? We can harness it to do something with it. Very different, right? Neither of these defines what anger is. Anger is not actually a horse, and anger is not actually a hot liquid in a container. This is the formula that Lakoff and Johnson use. But again, when we're in that metaphor, we speak as if it's true. We speak as if it's an actual, it's really there. And that's how it works. So some other examples here: ideas, many metaphors for ideas: food, people, plants, cutting instruments, commodities. And again, some examples. Ideas are food. She devoured the book. Let that idea gel. Ideas are people. He's the father of modern biology. Those ideas died off long ago. Ideas are commodities. It's important how you package your ideas. That's a worthless idea, etc. So that is that is in the folder I gave you, and I'll walk through the folder in a minute. So the last thing I want to say I got from Gary, and again, I talk about this in the book. So in Gary's book about metaphor, he uses an analogy of volcanoes. And he says there's sort of three categories of volcanoes. So an active volcano is a volcano that's active, that's still flowing. And he says an active metaphor is one that when we come across it, we know it's a metaphor and we need to like unpack it. So, I quote a Mary Oliver poem, "The dark hug of time." Like we know that time doesn't hug anybody. So we know that's a metaphor, and then we unpack it to try to get at what she's trying to say. Then Gary says there's dormant volcanoes. A dormant metaphor is one that we use, but when we say it, we know we're not speaking literally. I'm up a creek without a paddle. That'd be a dormant metaphor. You know what I mean when I say it. And we use it without thinking to explain a certain situation. Finally, Geary talks about extinct metaphors. And these are the metaphors that Lakoff and Johnson call metaphors we live by. These are metaphors that we're so deeply in, we have no idea they're metaphors. The examples that Geary gives are, I see what you mean. And she's a very warm person. So I see what you mean means I understand. People who have no sight use this metaphor because it comes from a very early childhood experience of seeing, called seeing is knowing. If you can't see something, it's not there, it doesn't exist. And people say, I see what you mean, and most people don't think they're using a metaphor in that moment. The metaphor is seeing is knowing. She's a very warm person. The metaphor is, emotional connection is warmth. And it comes again from an infant experience of being held next to someone's body, so that safety and connection are experienced as physical warmth, and actually the neurons in the brain fuse. So the part of the brain that registers physical warmth, the neurons connect to the part of the brain that register emotional connection, and she's a very warm person becomes a metaphor that we use all the time and don't think twice about. So when I was reading the Geary, I realized, God is an extinct metaphor. Whenever we talk about God, whenever we use human verbs, we are in the metaphor of God as a big person, even if we completely don't believe that. It doesn't matter. We're in that metaphor and our speech reifies it. And the questions we ask come up from that. Why would God do this to me, right? You wouldn't ask that question of a river, right? Why does God, most of the questions people have about God assume God is a big person. Some of those questions are helpful. Some of them are fairly useless because there's no answer to them. Yes, Nancy, I will put that link in again. Thanks. So I'm going to pause there and then go on to talk a little bit about how I've then begun teaching the metaphors themselves. Any questions about anything I've said so far?
How do you define an extinct metaphor?
It's what Geary and it's what Lakoff and Johnson called metaphors we live by. So it's metaphors that, like the ones on that sheet, those are extinct metaphors or metaphors we live by. They're metaphors that we use all the time without having any idea they're metaphors. So again, when I say like rein in your anger, I'm really not thinking anger is a horse. Until I saw that, I had no idea that was a metaphor. Until I read that somewhere, I had no idea that horse was a metaphor for anger. No, you start noticing these things once you're thinking this way. But I would say an extinct metaphor is any metaphor you use with completely unconsciously.
Do you find it's ever helpful to highlight that notion of extinct metaphor in, I don't know, that kind of theological or pastoral conversation that one has with folks?
In the class, yes, I would say definitely do it. I wouldn't do it in a moment if someone, and again, it's not bad. Like God is a big person. Let me be clear. It's not a bad metaphor. It just tends to be the only one we relate to. And the really important thing about metaphors, no one metaphor can capture all aspects of human experience. So no one metaphor for the divine can possibly capture that. So if someone, if in a pastoral moment, I would say, Liz, if, God as a parent or a beloved or whatever is useful, like go for it. Like I'm not trying to take that away. But in the context of the class, it is important for people to look at what they're doing. Because what they'll say, what I've often come across when I teach this is people say like, well, that's all very nice, the water metaphor and the this and that, but that's not really God. And what are they meaning? What they're meaning is that's not God as a big person, because that's what God really is. Now they don't think that, but that is so embedded in their brain, it's almost impossible. And I think, again, the things we think about God, the questions we ask, the sort of existential questions we ask, it's implicit. Why do good things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people is within the metaphor of God as a big person. There's an assumption that there is someone up there deciding what happens to whom. And if that was a fair person, they wouldn't do that. Right? People don't tend to ask that question of hurricanes. Right? So it's really important to unpack this when you're teaching it. You have to unpack it first. And again, the first two chapters of the book go into it in more depth, but people need to see it. It's also one reason when I start in the book and when I teach, when possible, I refer to God as it and not he or she, because it's really important to break the person thing if you're going to go into the non-human metaphors, which I go into. So there's like a peeling off. And again, it's not to dispose of the God as a big person. It's just to realize that there's a very rich palette that we have in our tradition. And we've been painting with like one color. We've been painting with blue, and it's like we've got the whole rainbow. Amita, yeah.
Yes. I mean, my thought is, in the Bible, okay, in the Tanakh, even though there are many, many metaphors, like in the Tehillim, there's a lot of metaphors, and, they all got into our Reconstructionist. It's one of the most wonderful things about our Siddur is that the metaphors are in there. But still, certainly in the Bible, even though there are metaphors, God is a big man in the Bible. And so therefore I could see, people, Jews, will say, and rightfully so, like, I mean, yes, in Kabbalah, and also in Rabbinic Judaism, God is still a big man. It's maybe later that God stops just being a big man, but it's like, if you talk about God and really, like the river example, people might say, well, that's the Tao. That's Buddhist. That is not Jewish. Let's face it. So
okay, so let me respond to that, Amita. I would say that's not the case. I would say we've been trained to think that's the case. And the entire project of this book was me diving, I'll use that metaphor, diving very deeply into our sources. I feel like our ancestors had a very rich palette of metaphors available to them. Sometimes God is a big person, not always. And for whatever reason, we take one part really seriously and we don't take the other part seriously. And so the whole point of the book is to take those parts seriously. They sang to rocks, they spoke to rocks. It's very clear if you read it. There's no reason to think that's any less real or any less powerful than, God as, distant ruler. The other book I'd really, really recommend, if you haven't read it, I cite it in the book, is James Kugel, The God of Old. First of all, Kugel is like the best name for a Jewish Bible scholar, but The God of Old, James Kugel. In it, it's his most personal book. He's a fabulous biblical scholar, but he tries to get at the earliest strands of the Hebrew Bible and what is going on for the people who wrote these texts. The Malachim, the messengers, appear in lots of ways. Sometimes they're people, sometimes they're a bush, sometimes they're a donkey. And then again, we're trained that one of the metaphors is voice, kol. We're trained to think that that's a person speaking. It's not, it's just a voice, it's sound. So again, we're reading our own biases back. And so my hope is that when people read the book, they'll, so yes, is the human metaphor very prominent? It is. I think we've been trained to elevate that beyond everything else. So anyway, that's my response to that. But you don't have to believe me, but that's what I try to do. That's what I try to do in the book. So let me go on a little bit, and then we'll have time for more questions. So it's really important if you're going to teach the book each chapter of the book, for folks who haven't read it, the first two chapters are lay out this premise that I've just done in 10 minutes, and then the rest of the book it's a chapter per metaphor. Often I'll have people begin with their own experience. So I'll just have people, just say, tell me your associations of water, and I'll just have people share. And there's many associations. The immediate thing you will see if you do this with any group of people is how variegated that list is, right? Water is nourishing and life-sustaining. Water is drowning. Water, we see how rich it is, and immediately it becomes obvious what a rich metaphor for the divine this is. It's got the destructive and the constructive. And water, actually, Amita, that's one thing I realized was that, B'Tselem Elohim, why do we assume that means people look like God or God looks like us? Why doesn't it mean that we're 70% water, right? There's many ways to refigure our text once we do this. So often I'll start with that. And in between classes, often I'd ask people to pay attention. Like if I was teaching water, pay attention to water. Like I live in the Northeast, we take water for granted. It's not like those of you maybe in desert regions. Pay attention when you drink water, when you wash your hands, give people practices, get them really connecting. We have to bring the metaphors off the page and back into people's experiences. And again, I believe these metaphors arose out of real experiences that the people who wrote these texts were having, but we've lost we've lost that. Let me share, I just want to show you what the Google folder looks like, and please go in there. And so these are the folders I've made. Why we need metaphor has a few things. It's got the why and how of metaphor that I just shared, and Barbara King on religion. And then, for example, under water, Can someone unmute and tell me if you're seeing my screen change as I do this?
Yep, we see it.
Great, thank you. A few things here. I've got God is what are texts, what are imagery in Tanakh, which is, and then what are names and chants. This is for practice. So I will keep adding to this, but again, just so you know, you have access to them if any of these are useful to you. Biblical texts and a few other things in each of the folders. And I've got water, voice, rock, makom, place, fire, and cloud. And then here are just some names, names of God that I've found sometimes useful for folks. These are all the names I've been able to find in Jewish tradition for the divine. Non-human ones for the most, actually no, and some human ones, take it back, and some human ones. So that's that resource. And then what I also find is, before I sort of give my take on the metaphor, is to put people in small groups, in pairs or small groups, to study some of the texts and see what speaks to them. And that's the thing you should know. Like, one metaphor might speak to someone and not to someone else, and that's fine. And it's really important to teach multiple metaphors. I've done this in 1.5 hour, webinars. I prefer to do it in multi-week sessions, so I can spend a week or two on each metaphor if possible, depending on what you think you'll be doing. And then the other thing is, it's really important that people practice. So at the end of each chapter are practices. I'll just mention a few page numbers now. You can write down and see it later if you haven't got there yet. I learned this from my friend and teacher, David Jaffe, Hispilus Hitpa'alut, which is a way of activating verses. You take a verse and you work with it, you study it, you repeat it, you sing it, you chant it, you do dance it, when you do whatever you need to do to bring it alive. One way to bring it alive is with chants. Rabbi Sheffa Gold has chants for many of these verses, for many of these metaphors. The links to her chants are in the documents. If you look at so the Hispilus is one. The chants are another practice. And then Hitbodedut. So on pages 114 to 116, I describe the practice of Hitbodedut from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, speaking to God, using these names, using the rock names or the water names or other names for the divine. But again, just getting people sort of, habituated a bit. And it's really important that they know that if the word God just does not work for them, drop it. It's a Germanic word. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a placeholder. In the Jewish tradition, we are very lucky to have Yod He Vav He, to have this name that you can't say and that you can't conceptualize. In there, we can put all these other names. So spending some time going over the metaphor stuff, helping people connect to their own experiences of the various metaphors, doing some text study and doing practice. That's sort of the core of what I've been doing with folks. And it's very powerful. You have to trust me that it's been quite life-changing for people, which is why I decided to write the book. So that is what I have to say. Until you ask me questions, then I'll say more. So, so anyway, either raise your hand electronically or just go ahead and unmute, and let's I'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions.
So Toba, you mentioned something, and you speak very quickly, which is wonderful. You get a lot of information in. But
I'll say it again. What was
what you said that David Jaffe, Rabbi David Jaffe, had taught you?
I'm sorry.
Catch the phrase.
Hispilus, which is the Ashkenazi Hitpalut. It's on pages 72 to 73 in the book. It's active. He calls it activization. He calls it activating Torah. Hitpalut, Hispilus. It's a Musar technique.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, for the kind words. Jeremy, you had your.
Maybe I did. I had trouble getting in, so I missed the first few minutes. So do you do do you usually structure this as like an introductory thing, and then a water lesson and a cloud lesson?
Yeah. I'm just going to put, for folks who came in later, I'm putting in again the Google Drive. It really depends how much time you have, Jared, but I would say definitely introduction doesn't have to be a whole session. It could just be like the first half hour, but like just again, because now there's the book, so you could send people off to read the first 2 chapters, but I would spend some time going over it with people. And I would say, I don't know what it would be like for you all, so you'll have to see. I'm fairly for Brenta about this, so when people push back, I can push back. I think you need to feel comfortable enough with it to be able to. It's really new for people when it comes to the God stuff. Some people get it right away, and other people are just very resistant. So you'll have to see how that goes. You might have to say to them, "Trust me," and like just let's play and see. And you don't have to. And again, this is not about belief. I'm not trying to get anyone to believe anything. I just am, inviting people into an experience. Yeah, and then I'll do a week or 2 on each metaphor. It's good to like do the metaphor, send them off to do some practice, come back the next session, and reflect on that. The metaphors are very rich, so you probably can't get to every aspect of every metaphor. So it's going to like water. If you're going to get into all of the water stuff that I cover, you're going to need at least 2 weeks, maybe 3, but maybe you just want to do one part. Say fire is also a lot of these are very, I could write a book about each of the metaphors. So I think it's going to really depend on how deep you want to go. And again, I have not had the book to send people home and read first. So I don't know how to do that. I don't know the best way to use the book. It might be do it, send people home, read the chapter, and then come back and talk. I didn't have a book. I just had the stuff I was giving them. So there's a little more extra stuff that you have now. Does that help? Other folks, thoughts, questions? Yeah, Liz.
2 questions. One is, have you ever done this work with either preteens, pre-b'nai mitzvah, or older teens? So start with that one.
I have been teaching it to our 5th and 6th graders for a number of years. I'm hopefully there'll be a young person's version of the book is my next hope. That would be cool. With kids, I would say I wouldn't even talk about the metaphor stuff. I would just go right in. Sometimes I've had kids just tell me when they hear the word God, what do they think of, and then I just get all of that out. And usually there's a range. And then one thing I've done with kids is I've put out a whole bunch of pictures of water, different kinds of water, from drinking glasses to, ocean, to tidal waves to whatever. And then I've asked them just to write adjectives around it.
Right.
And then I pulled together all the adjectives, then we compare those adjectives to like what we said about God, and we talk about how might that be similar. I've done meditations with kids, so yes, it is accessible to them. I can make a folder of some lessons. I need to do that. I don't know if it works or not. I feel like if it's not supported, I realize if it's not supported by other things they're doing, like how they're learning davening and all that, I'm not sure it sticks, but the very least, I'm hoping I'm planting some seeds, that God is a big person, because I do think God is a big person. What Amita raised earlier, in the stories they're learning, often God, the big person, is dominant. So this is like a little drip of something else, but it is possible to teach this to kids. Yeah.
Right. Perfect. And last is, we've all, or some of us have taught, classes in spiritual autobiography or spiritual journey, that sort of thing. Text-based or not text-based. Do you see an intersection here? Do you see some way of
Interesting. I haven't done that, but that's really cool. Because I've usually stayed away from I've let some people bring in God and some don't in those classes, but that could be really interesting. I will say, for any of you who are spiritual directors, which I am not, I've been in spiritual direction and writing this book and playing with all this stuff with my spiritual director. I think it's very useful in spiritual direction. And it's been fun to have her ask me, well, which metaphor are you in, like for this particular situation? That's been really fun. So I think it can be really useful that way. But that's really interesting. I have not used it in spiritual autobiography classes, but I don't see why not, Liz. And maybe assigning some of it, in that context might be interesting for people. And maybe assigning the parts where I tell a little bit of my story. So if people haven't read the book yet, I have some stories from my life. So maybe the places where I connect my story to the metaphor might be helpful for people. Oh, Louise, yeah.
Yeah, I have 2 more questions. One is, do you practice the practice with people in the group before you send them away for the week in between, or do you just tell them to read the book and find it out how to do it?
Good question. I would do, the ones that lend themselves to the group, I would definitely do. I would definitely do the chants together. First of all, most people don't know how to do that. So And again, any chants that I reference in the book or on the sheets, there's a link. They're all Chef of Gold chants. That's a nice one to do in a class, to like just talk about it, do it, and then say, let's just try this. Let's just chant, you know. You could certainly do heat boat and do it in the class. You could just send them off for 10 minutes to talk to the rock, you know, and then come back. There's a mountain pose meditation for rock. You could certainly, I've done that with people. So I think some of them do lend themselves to doing it. And so I'd say probably both, you know, I would do both.
My second thing is actually I would love it if you would write this as a teen book. At this point, I teach a pedagogy of B'nai Mitzvah class at Hebrew College, and I use Larry Kushner's book on spirituality for young people, which I've loved, but to have something new would be fantastic. So I look forward to that next.
Thank you. Yes, and on my future spare time, I will do that. Yes, Avi, yes.
So one question I have is the extent to which you mentioned a couple of times, we're not here to talk to people about whether or not they believe in God, whether or not they have faith in God. And at least when I have taught, what I've done is I've made that very clear at the outset. Like, if you're here to resist God or not resist God, if it's about that, this class is not for you. In other words, when you talk about being, forthright about some of these things, that's certainly what I do. And if people get discouraged, I frankly think for the rest of the class, it's really important for them to know that I am not here to sort of deal with all of their doubts about the existence of God. They can have them, but that's not when I'm teaching about God as love, I'm not here to explain to them, yeah, but God did these bad things in the Bible all the time. It's just, and I'm just wondering whether or not that's how you encounter that issue of resistance to the whole notion of God.
I mean, people with that much distance probably don't come to my classes, but so I think to welcome skepticism, I would definitely be welcoming, to that. I mean, what I usually do, Avi, is I just do this move. I just say, I think when you ask that question, it's really coming from this other metaphor, and I'm trying to get out of that metaphor. I mean, I really just try to reframe the question, from. There's been like literally one person, I was on a Zoom thing, and one person who just felt like this whole thing was apologetics and clearly has a lot of anger and a lot of stuff. And I could, it may be one-to-one, I could talk to her and heal some of whatever is causing her such pain about our liturgy and our whatever. But mostly I haven't found that. I'll give you an example. This was an early moment, the first time I taught this. So I don't make that explicit. It's just more if it comes up, I try to gently say, look, belief in or not usually resides in this God is a big person metaphor. And what I say in the book is I am trying to reframe the conversation. So this was a beautiful example. We were doing God as place, makom, this rabbinic name for the divine. And so we had studied some texts about God as place, and I'd sent them all up for a week. I have no idea what I'd asked them to do, if anything. And then they came back, and there was this woman who I did not know. She was not a congregant. She found the class, online or something, and came. So she had been at services the previous week, not at our shul, at some other shul where she went. And this is what she told me. She said, it used to be, I have a really hard time with God. And when we would get to the Shema, and I just would keep my mouth closed because I couldn't say it. I just couldn't say it because I don't believe it. She said, but I resonate very deeply with place. She said, so the whole time, the first part of the service, she said, I was just bringing to mind different places that are meaningful to me. She said, and then when we got to the Shema, I brought them all together in my mind, and I said the Shema, and she said, I had an experience I've never had before. So that was so beautiful to me. I didn't give her that practice. Like, she just came up with it. So it's like trusting this, like it really is very powerful, and people own it, like, because they understand, they own it because they know what a place is, and they know what water is, and they know what rocks are. And they, what I'm saying? Like, everyone has experiences of these things. It's very accessible. And so it's sort of amazing. So I've had less of that resistance. It's there, but I've had much less of it.
Right. Well,
yeah,
so
Judith.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Avi. Judith, yeah.
Hi. So I'm assuming this is a tried and true one. One idea that I remember from many years ago, David Wolpe in his book, Talking to Children About God, that one of the most impactful things that because I still remember it all these years later, was he said, God is like love. And that's an image or metaphor now that I know I've been using for my whole career, that I find really helpful and instructive in a lot of ways. And I think it was mentioned a little bit before, and I'm just really curious. I was just paging through the book, which I have not read yet, to see if you talk about that. But I'd be very interested to hear if you have any comment one way or another about God is love in this metaphor context.
I don't think love can be a metaphor for the divine because it's also a concept. It can be an analogy. I think I could say, I've done this with third graders. I've said, like, I think about God the way I think about love. Like, can you raise your hand if you think your parents love you? And thankfully, all the kids raised their hands. And then I said, how would you prove that to me? How would I know that? And then what they tend to do is say, well, because my mom cuddles me, or whatever. I say, okay, the way we know that is through our experience. So I can get to the God stuff that way. And that does resonate with them. And God is love is a beautiful statement. I don't think it's a metaphor, because love is not a physical experience. Love is also a concept that we can only get through metaphors. So it's beautiful. It's just not, that's why it's not there. Because it's not, I don't think it's a metaphor in the way the cognitive linguists would call it a metaphor. I'm not a cognitive linguist, so maybe ask one and they'll tell you. That's the best I can do. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful analogy.
Thank you. No, I wanted to hear if you had a read on it. Thank you.
Yeah. And it might be that people experience through the sacred through experiences of love. I would say that, to the extent that both love and the sacred are about connection, and that's where the Barbara King goes, that's probably why they're analogous. Barbara J. King talks about humans having this concentric circle of experience from beginning with family, then, through humanity, through creation to something other. So love is the inner rings of that circle. So maybe that's why we tend to go there, and it's very powerful. Other folks, thoughts, questions? Yeah, Jeffrey.
So since you mentioned Kaplan in the beginning, I'd like to just go back about a half a century ago when I was sitting in his living room in Jerusalem, and he was talking about Deuteronomy 4:19. He was studying Shema, and he's trying to get to the concept. He was a young man. He was only like 93 at the time. So he was trying to get to the idea of really what is God and what is God all about. And he said, if you look at Deuteronomy 4:19, and I didn't know what it was, and he of course chastised me for it, but he said it talks about when you look up at the skies and you see all the heavenly bodies and the clouds and everything else, don't pray to them, but Kaplan says, but God put them there for anybody else who couldn't grasp the concept of him, of God, of the idea. So I think, Toba, that Kaplan was on his way of entering into God is here with your book, trying to say that not everybody is going to grasp what it is. Find the metaphors, find those things that are there in the world, and then bring them for yourself to comprehend.
This actually, Jeffrey, is where I part ways with Kaplan. So I'm gonna, I mean, I don't know I have no idea what Kaplan would say today, because, Kaplan would be a different Kaplan because he was always ahead of all of us. So I have no idea where he'd be today. But where I think he was 100 years ago was where Maimonides was, which was this progressivist way of thinking, which was that more physical is more primitive and more true is more abstract, right? That there's something we can't grasp, and the physical is like a consolation. It's like the Rashi take on the Mishkan, right? The Rashi and his followers, that the Mishkan was a concession, as opposed to Nachmanides and his followers were like, no, the Mishkan was the best thing that ever happened to the Jewish people. So when I read The God of Old, it made it clear to me our ancestors had a much more immediate and profound experience of the divine than any of us will ever have. I really believe that. And they were much more connected to the land. They were much more connected to their embodied experience. And they had access to the divine through the world around them in ways that we in the West have lost. So I completely part ways with Kaplan here. I don't think the physical is a concession. I think it's the only thing we have. And we have to take the metaphors extremely seriously. as our only pathway in. You cannot worship an abstraction. It's impossible, so I really want to revive the physical, connect us to water, to fire, to land, to all of these things, because I think that is the pathway to the divine. So now those aren't definitions, right? It's not paganism. It's not saying a rock is God, but it is saying that through my experience of rock, and my associations with rock, I can get at something about the sacred that I could not get there by, being Maimonides, just thinking a lot in my bedroom, you need the physical. So I don't think that's what I don't, maybe Kaplan was on that road. I don't know Jeffrey because I didn't know him. I wish I had that experience of being chastised by him. I'd love it. But I think that progressivist way of thinking that was very dominant in the early 20th century, I think, now we're understanding maybe that where it leads us to ultimately was this very abstract notion of God that I think is really dry and is a reason why Jews have, can't find any spiritual meaning in Judaism, because there's nothing there. There's literally nothing there. If you make God into nothing, there's nothing there. So I feel like the metaphor is incredibly important for re-enlivening, our experience. Yeah, Flo. And then Nancy. Yeah.
Have you taught this in a interdenominational setting at all? I work as an interdenominational chaplain, and thinking, maybe there's parts of this can be taught to the other chaplains as they go through this. Plus, it would help my own thinking because I encountered the God concept all the time when I'm working with patients often. So I was just wondering, have you?
I've done it with some chaplaincy groups, mostly Jews, but there've been some non-Jewish chaplains who work in a Jewish setting. The good thing about this flow is that almost all the texts are from the Hebrew Bible. So if most of the colleagues are Christian, these are their texts too. So it's very easy. I don't have experience teaching it to like Hindus or Muslims or people who do not have Hebrew Bible as part of their tradition. But I would say Christians and Jews, yes, I think this is very accessible. The only rabbinic metaphor in there is makom, is place. Everything else is from the Hebrew Bible or it's modern. So yeah, you can totally do this in interfaith, interdenominational setting, I think. Nancy, yeah.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, if this isn't too personal, when you're looking for the God of love, which metaphor is your favorite?
God of love, that's a great question. I think it depends which aspect of love, in terms of some of the practices. So in Makom, I offer the Makom as the place of compassion. I offer the metta meditation, the setting that. So that's, Makom is one. It's associated with Rachamana, with womb, with that kind of love, compassion. In the rock chapter, when I talk about God as refuge, I offer a receiving love meditation. So that would be the Ahava Rabbah. We are loved by an unending love. So I think rock and place for sure. I don't go there with fire, but one could, fire is passion as well as, so I think probably any of them. I would be interested, I would also be interested, Nancy, maybe to look at language and see where do we use the same metaphors for love, like she's my rock, like, do we ever use metaphors for other humans maybe, or other beings that we would also use for God? That might be a fun thing to do, to see. But I think definitely, in those two places, Makom and rock, I make pretty explicit the connection to compassion and love of self and others. But again, it's in voice, I think it's also in voice in terms of, Shema and V'ahavta. It's in many places. So that could be a beautiful drash on this. Maybe someone else can write that book or that drash on the book. A few more minutes. Anyone who hasn't spoken yet or asked anything yet want to ask anything?
I do.
Yeah.
I am back at the horse metaphor. I want to say I read your book and I think it's brilliant, and thank you so very, very much. I was just thrilled to read it. I'm back at the horse metaphor, and some of you are better biblical scholars than I am, but I am wondering if Erech Apayim in the 13 attributes, the long nose, is a horse metaphor. And if we could play with that for High Holiday.
I don't, that's interesting. I mean, there's in the fire text, you'll see a little bit about yichar af. Af actually is a metonym for anger. So I think the erech apayim means not getting angry right away. It means your nose is long, you don't get there. But if you want to connect to horse, go for it. I'm not really a horse person, but that's cool. We got a few minutes left. Anybody else wanna chime in? Let me drop one other, I realize I should have done this earlier. One other link in the chat. So if you want to buy this in bulk, if you don't want to pay shipping, leave enough time to get it, but which I think is a few weeks. But this is the bulk link. It's also on my website. My website is Rabbi Toba Spitzer .net. That's where I'll have like appearances and other webinars and stuff. But yeah, if you are thinking of teaching it, I'm trying to get the book out there. If you feel like 25 is too much for your community, you want to connect with anybody you saw here and, do a joint order, that works as well. And Nancy and I will be talking about the book on Thursday for Evolve. So it'll be fun. That's my next little thing. Any other questions anybody has? Awesome. Thank you, Jill. I'm glad you could come. Yeah, Ruth.
So I'm wondering, first, I also want to just say thank you so much, Toba. We've been talking about this and I've been waiting for years for this book, and I'm so excited to be able to use it. Do you ever start maybe talking about metaphor and then asking people, just based on their own experience, before you start going into looking at verses and things, let's say a list of, or one of those kinds of charts of the different metaphors in the book, that you use, and see, are there any here that you particularly resonate with your sense of connection with, however you experience spiritual connection, spirituality, connection with the divine, and see before they look, and then maybe at the end of the class, after they've looked at the metaphors, do it again and see if there are any changes.
I haven't. Partially that's because as I was teaching it, I was making it up as I went along, so I didn't have the list yet. But I have no idea. I don't know if they would know before you try. I have no idea. It's really interesting. You can try. I really have no idea. Yeah. Yeah, Jill.
So kind of connected to what Ruth was asking, what I have done in teaching about God before I even go into metaphor, and I often refer to everything else you've written about metaphor, so thank you. But I ask people we do a meditation, and I ask people to think about an experience they have had in which they felt totally connected at one, even though it may have been momentary, but to have their own experience of some time in their life that they felt awesome, things were awesome. And then I had people share with each other. And out of that experience, I would say that can be a placeholder for the divine, that experience. If it's at the birth of a child, at the deathbed, at the Grand Canyon, and then they have something to hang on to before we get into the whole challenging metaphors.
Right. I think grounding an experience is good. I think I might caution around that. It sounds like,
yeah,
I find I have to push back against the sacred is the positive, to really push, that we only associate godliness with positive experiences. And the book goes into this, but, death, illness, loss, anger,
yeah,
God's there too. And I would be careful with that. I mean, it's fine to do that as a setting, but I think the parts of the God as a big person metaphor that people don't like are the hard parts, right? And I have found when I shift metaphor, I can invite people into the hard parts in a different way. And the fire chapter is probably the best example of that, but there's also something in the water chapter when my spouse was dying. And so I think it's really, if I have two things I want to do is peel away God as a big person, but also peel away to be spiritual is to have only pleasant experience, which is
Yes.
really unfortunate and seems to come out of the new agey crap, it's also in the electricity metaphor part of the book. It's like the world is terrifying. To be alive is terrifying. To engage with the sacred is terrifying. And
Yes.
let's just say it,
Yes.
just have it out there and not run away from it. And if we're not imagining it as a big person beating us up, maybe we can actually access it, in positive ways. So I'm not saying not to do that, but I would just be careful.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks. Thank you.
final question or comment, anyone? Got 2 minutes left. I really appreciate people taking the time. I really appreciate you all helping get this out there. Again, I wrote the book because it needed to be written, and for some reason the universe chose me, even though I don't believe in chosenness. And and it's really gratifying. I'm just hearing wonderful things, from colleagues and folks who have the book. So I appreciate your help in getting it out there, because I do think it hopefully will do some healing in the world. And I know you guys will all use it in beautiful, amazing ways and bring yourselves to it. In ways that will enrich it. And that's why I'm making all the documents and everything accessible. I really just want this out there in the world. I have no attachment to it now. It's gone. So may it proliferate, and may you help that in whatever way is meaningful to you. So thanks, everyone. And I will see you hopefully in the person at some point.